I was standing in the grand ballroom of the Ashworth estate when I saw my mother's face drain of color. She didn't recognize me at first. 15 years and a new name will do that, but she recognized the house. Every chandelier, every marble column, every portrait on the wall that she'd sold to pay for my sister's third wedding. The house that had been in our family for 200 years until she forged my grandmother's signature and sold it out from under all of us. Welcome, I said, my voice echoing through the space, to the Ashworth Family Museum of Betrayal. The security guard at my elbow shifted his weight. My mother's hands trembled as she clutched her designer purse, the one she'd bought with the money from selling grandmother's jewelry collection. Behind her, my father looked confused. My sister Lydia looked furious. And my Uncle Richard looked like he was calculating his escape route. Good. They should all be afraid. You can't, my mother started. I can, I interrupted. I own this house, bought it back 6 months ago, every last inch of it, and I've spent those 6 months turning it into something special. Would you like a tour? I didn't wait for an answer. I'd sent them formal invitations to the grand opening of a new historical museum, promising a generous donation to their favorite charities if they attended. They'd all come, unable to resist the lure of money and social prestige. They had no idea the museum was about them. Follow me to Exhibit A, I said, walking toward the East Wing. The timeline of theft. It started when I was 7 years old. That was the first time I understood that something was deeply wrong in the Ashworth family, though I wouldn't understand the full scope of it until much later, until after I died. Yes, died. At 23, I was poisoned by my own sister. Not quickly, not obviously. Lydia was too clever for that. She'd been slipping small doses of arsenic into my food for 6 months, just enough to make me weak, forgetful, sick. Enough that when I finally collapsed during my graduate school thesis defense, everyone assumed it was exhaustion, stress, a tragic heart condition. I was dead within a week. But death wasn't the end. I woke up in my 7-year-old body in my childhood bedroom on the morning of my grandmother's 75th birthday, the morning everything began to fall apart. I lay there in my pink canopy bed, hyperventilating, my adult consciousness crammed into a child's body, remembering everything. My entire first life played out in my mind like a film reel. Grandmother's suspicious fall down the stairs when I was 8. My trust fund mysteriously emptying itself throughout my teenage years. My acceptance to Harvard being sabotaged so Lydia could go instead. My mother forging documents, my father looking away, my uncle helping them hide the evidence, and finally, Lydia's patient murder, all so she could inherit what little was left in my name. They'd stolen everything. My childhood, my education, my inheritance, my grandmother, my life. But now I had something they couldn't steal: knowledge. I knew every move they were going to make. I knew which lawyer my mother would bribe, which bank accounts my father would empty, which lies Lydia would tell. I knew it all, and I was going to stop them. More than that, I was going to make them pay. The first few years were the hardest. I was a child again, powerless, watching my beloved grandmother slowly being isolated from me. In my first life, I hadn't understood what was happening. I'd been too young to recognize that my mother was methodically convincing grandmother that I was troubled, ungrateful, disturbed. Too young to notice the medications that made grandmother confused and pliable. Too young to prevent the accident that would kill her. But this time I knew. This time I was ready. I started documenting everything. I had a cheap camera I'd begged for my 8th birthday, and I used it constantly. I photographed every bruise when my mother's discipline got physical. I recorded conversations on my cheap tape recorder, catching my mother coaching Lydia on how to act sweet in public while tormenting me at home. I saved every report card before my mother could forge my grades lower. I hid copies of every legal document I could sneak from my father's study. I couldn't stop grandmother's death. I tried. God, I tried, but they were so careful, so subtle. But I made sure that before she died, she knew the truth. I showed her everything I'd documented. The recordings, the photographs, the forged signatures on her own bank statements. In her last lucid weeks, she wept and held me and told me she was sorry she hadn't protected me. Be smarter than them, Catherine, she whispered, using my real name, the name I'd been born with before Lydia convinced everyone to call me the insulting nickname Kitty instead. Be patient. Wait until you're strong enough to fight back, and then take everything from them, the way they took everything from us. She died on my ninth birthday. The official cause was complications from her fall. The real cause was the carefully measured overdose of her heart medication that my mother had administered. I was there. I saw it, and I documented it. But I was 9 years old and no one would believe me, so I waited. I endured 6 more years of abuse. 6 years of Lydia destroying my homework and blaming me. 6 years of my mother slapping me and calling it discipline. 6 years of my father acting like I didn't exist unless he was screaming at me for being a disappointment. 6 years of my uncle Richard helping them embezzle from grandmother's estate, which should have been held in trust for me but was instead being systematically drained. I endured it because I knew something they didn't. I knew exactly how to survive. I knew which punishments to avoid, which battles to lose strategically, which moments to play weak. I knew that if I could just make it to 18, if I could just get access to some of my inheritance before they stole it all, I could escape. And I knew about the provision in grandmother's original will, the one she'd written before my mother got her claws into it. I'd seen it in my first life, years too late, buried in a lawyer's archive. Grandmother had left a separate instruction hidden away that if I ever discovered the full extent of the family's betrayal and could prove it in court, I would inherit not just my portion, but everything. The entire estate, the house, the investments, the properties, all of it. All I had to do was prove it. At 15, I had my first breakthrough. I'd spent years teaching myself programming, law, accounting, everything I needed to understand the paper trail my family had left. I hacked my father's computer and found the complete financial records, every forged signature, every embezzled dollar, every fraudulent transaction, years and years of evidence. I copied everything to encrypted drives. I sent copies to safety deposit boxes in 3 different states, under fake names. I prepared a complete dossier for the FBI, the IRS, the state attorney general, but I didn't send them, not yet, because I didn't just want justice, I wanted revenge. At 16, I did something that no one expected. I failed out of school, spectacularly. I made sure everyone thought I was a troubled, disturbed teenager with no prospects and no future. My mother was thrilled. It made it easier to paint me as incompetent, making it easier to justify the conservatorship she was planning to file when I turned 18. What they didn't know was that I'd already been accepted to MIT under a pseudonym. I'd taken the SATs at a testing center 3 states away. I'd applied using my maternal grandmother's maiden name, Reeves, Catherine Reeves. No one connected her to the pathetic Kitty Ashworth, who was barely graduating high school. I'd also spent 2 years working remotely for a tech startup, using skills I'd developed in my first life. By the time I was 17, I had almost $100,000 saved under my fake identity. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The day I turned 18, my mother filed for conservatorship, just as I knew she would. She'd had me declared mentally incompetent due to my behavioral issues and learning disabilities, all documented by a psychiatrist she'd been bribing for years. I didn't fight it. In fact, I helped her win. I acted confused, unstable, helpless at the hearing. The judge granted her full control over my finances and my life. And 3 days later, Catherine Reeves disappeared. Kitty Ashworth vanished from the Ashworth house in the middle of the night, leaving no trace except a rambling, disturbed note about going to find herself. My mother called the police, but they found nothing. Another troubled teen runaway. The case went cold within months. No one ever connected Catherine Reeves, the brilliant MIT freshman, to Kitty Ashworth, the disturbed girl who disappeared. This section, I told my family as they stood frozen in the museum's East Wing, documents the first decade of your crimes, 1995 to 2005. Notice the photographs on the left. Those are the original bank statements from grandmother's accounts. On the right, you'll see the forged documents your mother used to drain them. The handwriting analysis is displayed in the center. My mother's face had gone from white to gray. This is private. Nothing is private once it becomes evidence of a crime, Mother. And everything here has already been submitted to the appropriate authorities. This isn't my evidence. These are copies from the district attorney's office. I had them prepared for the museum, all properly authenticated and certified. My father finally spoke. "Who are you?" I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Look closer, Daddy. Don't you recognize your daughter?" He squinted at me and I watched the recognition slowly dawn. "Kitty?" "Catherine," I corrected. My name was always Catherine. Grandmother named me after her mother. You let Lydia turn it into a mockery, into a pet name for something weak and small. But I was never weak. I was just waiting. Lydia pushed forward, her face twisted with fury. She was 35 now, expensively dressed, her third husband's money dripping from her jewelry. She'd burned through 2 fortunes already. I'd made sure of that, quietly sabotaging her marriages from afar. But she'd landed on her feet each time. This third husband was the richest yet. Or he had been. Until I'd sent him the evidence of Lydia's affairs. The divorce papers had been filed last week. She didn't know yet. You're supposed to be dead, Lydia hissed. The security guard stepped closer. I held up a hand. It's all right. She's just stating facts. I was declared legally dead 7 years ago after being missing for 10 years. Catherine Ashworth presumed dead. But Catherine Reeves? She's very much alive. And she spent the last 15 years building something beautiful. Shall we continue the tour? I gestured to the next room. Exhibit B, the murder of Rose Ashworth. I graduated from MIT in 3 years with degrees in computer science and finance. I was 21, and Catherine Reeves was a rising star in the tech world. I'd already sold my first startup for $8 million. My second company was worth $50 million and growing. The Ashworth family had no idea. As far as they knew, Kitty had been dead for years. They'd held a funeral. I'd watched from across the cemetery in disguise. My mother had cried beautifully for the cameras. Lydia had worn black couture. My father had given a moving speech about his troubled daughter who never found peace. They'd also immediately claimed my inheritance. The conservatorship gave my mother access to everything that should have been mine. The trust fund grandmother had left, what little remained after their embezzling, was drained within months. They sold everything, including my grandmother's jewelry, her artwork, her books, everything. And then they sold the house. The Ashworth estate, which had been in our family since 1823, was put on the market. 200 years of history, of memories, of legacy. They sold it to a real estate developer for $12 million, far below its actual value of nearly $30 million. I later discovered that my Uncle Richard had gotten a kickback from the developer, $5 million deposited in an offshore account. I watched the sale happen from my apartment in Boston. I watched my family home become a luxury resort and spa. I watched them desecrate my grandmother's memory and violate everything our family had stood for. And I began to plan in earnest. I spent the next 5 years building my fortune. I took calculated risks, made brilliant investments, and leveraged every piece of knowledge I had from my first life. I knew which stocks would soar, which tech companies would explode, which real estate markets would boom. By the time I was 26, Catherine Reeves was worth just over $300 million. I also spent those 5 years building my legal case. I hired the best forensic accountants, the most ruthless lawyers, the most discreet investigators. I had them build an airtight case against my entire family. Every crime, every fraud, every theft, every forgery. All of it documented, verified, prepared for prosecution. But I still didn't move, because there was one more thing I needed to do. I needed to buy the house back. The resort had failed within 2 years. The developer had overspent on renovations and underestimated the maintenance costs of a historical property. The estate went into foreclosure and a bank took possession. I waited patiently, watching the price drop as the bank grew desperate to unload the property. Finally, when I was 28, I made my move. Through a maze of shell corporations and intermediaries, I purchased the Ashworth estate for $9 million. The bank was thrilled to get rid of it. I spent the next 6 months restoring it, not to its former glory as a family home, but to something new, something perfect. A museum, a monument, a shrine to betrayal and justice. I hired historians, curators, archivists. I had every crime documented in painstaking detail, every forged signature enlarged and displayed, every bank statement printed and mounted, every photograph, every recording, every piece of evidence I'd gathered across 2 lifetimes. The Ashworth Family Museum of Betrayal wasn't just a collection of documents. It was a story. The story of how a family destroyed itself through greed. The story of how they murdered one of Boston's most beloved philanthropists and stole from their own child. The story of how they sold their legacy for money and lost everything. And at the center of it all was my story. Catherine Ashworth, who died. Catherine Reeves, who lived. The girl who came back from death itself to make things right. These are the photographs from grandmother's autopsy, I said, gesturing to a display that made my mother gag. Notice the levels of digoxin in her system. 10 times the prescribed dose. The medical examiner in 1999 ruled it an accident. But I had the tissue samples retested 3 years ago. The new toxicology report tells a different story. I moved to the next panel. Here's a timeline of grandmother's last month. Notice how she signed over power of attorney to you, Mother, just 2 days after a doctor's appointment where she was prescribed a new medication that made her confused and suggestible. A medication she didn't actually need. A medication prescribed by a doctor who was, at the time, in debt to our family for— Stop, my mother whispered. Please stop. No, I said simply. You didn't stop when I begged you not to hit me. You didn't stop when grandmother begged you to let her see me. You didn't stop when you poisoned me. Oh yes, Mother, I know about that too. Did you really think Lydia came up with that plan on her own? My mother's eyes went wide. Lydia grabbed her arm. Mother, don't— Oh, don't worry, I said cheerfully. This exhibit is about grandmother, not me. My attempted murder is in Exhibit E. We'll get there. Let's continue with Exhibit C. The embezzlement. We walked through room after room. The museum was thorough, meticulous, devastating. Exhibit C showed every dollar they'd stolen from grandmother's estate, from my trust fund, from various family investments. The total came to just over $18 million. I'd had it all rendered in a massive visualization, showing the flow of money from legitimate accounts to offshore banks, fake corporations, luxury purchases. Exhibit D was titled The Systematic Abuse of a Child, and it made my Uncle Richard vomit into a trash can. The photographs were hard to look at, the recordings were harder to hear. 7-year-old Kitty crying, 9-year-old Kitty being slapped, 12-year-old Kitty being told she was worthless, 15-year-old Kitty being locked in her room for days. I'd debated including this section. It was painful even now, even after everything. But it was necessary. People needed to understand why I'd done what I'd done. They needed to see that I wasn't just a vindictive daughter. I was a survivor. Exhibit E was the disappearance and presumed death of Catherine Ashworth. This one was almost artistic in its presentation. On one wall, newspaper clippings about the troubled teen who'd vanished. On another wall, the legal documents declaring me dead. And in the center, a video screen playing a loop of my mother and sister on talk shows, crying about their loss, accepting sympathy, asking for donations to a mental health foundation they'd created in my name. A foundation that was, of course, fake. They'd pocketed every dollar of donation money. That detail was displayed on a plaque beneath the video screen. You should know, I said conversationally, that the FBI is here, at the museum. They've been here since opening day, going through everything. The IRS sent a team too, and the district attorney. They're all very interested in your story. My father lunged at me then. The security guard caught him easily, pinning him against the walls. You little bitch, my father spat. We gave you everything. We raised you. We fed you. We put a roof over your head. You gave me nothing, I said coldly. You took everything. Grandmother gave me everything. Her love, her trust, her legacy, and you murdered her for it. You all did. I turned to the security guard. Escort them to Exhibit F. I think they'll find it enlightening. Exhibit F was the largest room in the museum. It was titled The Reckoning. This was where I documented my revenge. Every step, every move, every carefully orchestrated downfall. On the left wall was Lydia's story. Her 3 marriages, each one sabotaged by anonymous tips to her wealthy husbands about her affairs, her spending, her lies. The divorces that left her with nothing, due to ironclad prenuptial agreements I'd made sure their lawyers insisted on. The business ventures that had failed because I'd quietly undermined them. The social circles that had closed to her because I'd spread just enough true information about her past. She wasn't bankrupt yet, but she would be soon. I'd made sure of it. My Uncle Richard's section showed his investment portfolio, a series of schemes I'd fed him through intermediaries, each one designed to lose money. He'd gone from wealthy to merely comfortable, and soon he'd be neither. The final blow was coming next month, the IRS audit that would reveal decades of tax fraud. He was looking at prison time. My father's section was perhaps the most satisfying. I'd destroyed his reputation in his industry. Through careful leaks and strategic revelations, I'd exposed him as a fraud and a thief. He'd lost his position at his firm. His colleagues shunned him. His golf club had revoked his membership. He was a pariah. But my mother's section was the masterpiece. I'd spent years building a case for elder abuse, murder, fraud, embezzlement, and a dozen other charges. The evidence was overwhelming, and I'd timed it perfectly. The district attorney had filed charges 2 weeks ago. My mother was out on bail, but her trial date was set for 3 months from now. Her lawyers, the expensive ones she'd hired with stolen money, had already told her she had no chance. The evidence was too strong. She was looking at 30 years to life. "This museum," I said, gesturing to the room, "will be open to the public starting next week. Free admission. I've hired an excellent staff to give tours. I've prepared educational materials for schools. I want everyone at Bamoise to know your story. I want your crimes to be taught in law classes and ethics courses. I want you to be famous." My mother fell to her knees. "Please," she sobbed. "Please, Kitty, I'm your mother. I made mistakes. I'm sorry. Please don't do this." "My name," I said, my voice like ice, "is Catherine. And you're not my mother. A mother doesn't murder her own mother. A mother doesn't torture her daughter. A mother doesn't steal a child's inheritance and identity. You're not my mother, you're just a criminal." I turned to walk away, then paused. "Oh, one more thing. Exhibit G is still under construction, but you can preview it. Follow me." They did, because they had no choice. The guards made sure of it. Exhibit G was a single room at the very center of the house. Grandmother's bedroom, perfectly preserved exactly as it had been when she died. "This room," I said softly, "is a shrine to Rose Ashworth, a reminder of who she was and what she meant to this family. I've endowed a foundation in her name, a real one, that provides support to abused children trying to escape their families. It's funded with $50 million. It will help thousands of children escape situations like mine." I walked to the portrait of grandmother that hung over the fireplace. She looked regal and kind, the way I remembered her. "I won," I told her portrait. "I took everything back, just like you told me to." Then I turned to my family one last time. "You can see yourselves out. Your invitation to this museum is now permanently revoked. If you ever set foot on this property again, you'll be arrested for trespassing." I walked out of the room, leaving them there with their crimes and their grandmother's ghost. The trial was a media sensation. Everyone wanted to know about the Ashworth family and the daughter who'd come back from the dead to expose them. Catherine Reeves became a household name. I gave exactly 3 interviews, each one carefully calculated to control the narrative. I was the victim who'd become a victor, the abused child who'd grown into a powerful woman, the granddaughter who'd honored her grandmother's memory. The public ate it up. I became a symbol. Abuse survivors wrote to me. Children's advocates celebrated me. I was invited to speak at conferences, to consult with lawmakers, to advise nonprofits. I declined most of it. I wasn't interested in fame. I was interested in results. My mother was convicted on all counts, 35 years without parole. She'll die in prison. My father pleaded guilty to fraud and embezzlement to avoid the more serious charges. 15 years. He's 63. He'll be almost 80 when he gets out, if he lives that long. Uncle Richard got 12 years for his role in the embezzlement and tax fraud. His wife divorced him. His children won't speak to him. Lydia fought her charges harder than anyone, hiring an army of lawyers, launching PR campaigns, crying on television about how she'd been manipulated by our mother. It almost worked. She was always good at playing the victim. But then I released the recordings. The ones I'd made in my first life, before she killed me. Her voice, clear and cold, discussing how much arsenic to use, how to avoid detection, how to make sure I'd suffer first. The jury took 45 minutes to convict her of attempted murder. 25 years. She's already filed 3 appeals. They'll all be denied. 5 years after the museum opened, I stood in the grand ballroom again. It was the anniversary gala. a fundraiser for the Rose Ashworth Foundation. The museum had become one of Boston's premier attractions. Thousands of visitors came every year to learn about family abuse, financial crimes, and the importance of justice. I'd created educational programs, partnered with universities, funded research into elder abuse and child protection. The museum wasn't just about my revenge anymore, it was about prevention, about helping others avoid becoming victims. But it was still about revenge, too. I wasn't going to lie about that. Catherine? I turned to see an older man approaching me. He had kind eyes and gray hair. He looked familiar, though I couldn't place him immediately. "I'm Dr. James Morrison," he said. "I was your grandmother's attorney, her real attorney before your mother replaced me with someone she could control." My heart clenched. "Dr. Morrison, yes, I remember you. You used to bring grandmother chocolates." He smiled. "She loved those chocolates. I'm glad you remember." He paused, looking around the ballroom. "She would be so proud of you, Catherine. So incredibly proud." I felt tears threatening and pushed them back. I'd cried enough over the years. "Thank you." "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Something I couldn't tell you before during the trials. Attorney-client privilege, even posthumous, is tricky. But I've consulted with the ethics board, and they've agreed I can share this now." He pulled out an envelope yellowed with age. "Your grandmother came to see me 2 weeks before she died. She was lucid, despite what your mother was doing to her. She knew she didn't have much time. She gave me this to hold for you, with instructions that I should only deliver it if you ever came back." My hands shook as I took the envelope. It was addressed to me in grandmother's handwriting. Catherine Rose Ashworth. "She knew?" I whispered. "About everything?" "She suspected," Dr. Morrison said gently. "She couldn't prove it. She was too weak, too isolated. But she suspected. And she wanted you to know that even at the end, she believed in you. She knew you'd find a way to fight back." I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. Dr. Morrison patted my shoulder. "Read it when you're ready. I'll leave you alone." He walked away, leaving me standing in the ballroom with the envelope clutched in my hands. Around me, the gala continued. People laughed and drank champagne and made donations. My museum thrived. My foundation helped children. My revenge was complete. But in that moment, all I could think about was my grandmother. I waited until I was back in my apartment late that night before I opened the envelope. Inside was a single page written in grandmother's shaky handwriting. "My darling Catherine, if you're reading this, then you've done what I could not. You've exposed them. You've won. I knew you would. Even as a little girl, you were stronger than all of them combined. They mistook your kindness for weakness. They never saw your steel. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better. I'm sorry I let them isolate us. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder. But I was old and sick, and they were so very good at being cruel. But you, my darling girl, you will be better than them, better than me. You will survive, and you will thrive, and you will take back everything they stole, not just the money or the house, your name, your dignity, your future. Take it all, Catherine. Make them pay for what they have done. But more importantly, live a beautiful life. Fall in love. Create something wonderful. Be happy. That's the real revenge. Being happy when they tried so hard to destroy you. I love you more than all the stars in the sky." "Forever, grandmother," I cried then. Properly cried for the first time in years, not tears of pain or rage, but of relief, of resolution, of grief that had finally found its ending. She'd known. She'd believed in me. And I'd done it. I'd done exactly what she'd asked. 10 years after opening the museum, I sold my tech company for $1.2 billion. I used the money to expand the foundation, to open shelters, to fund legal aid programs for abuse victims. I bought back every piece of grandmother's jewelry that my mother had sold and put them on display in the museum. I commissioned a statue of grandmother for the front entrance. I also fell in love, like grandmother had wanted, with a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, a trauma psychologist who volunteered at the foundation. She understood my scars. She never asked me to be anything other than who I was. We got married in the museum's garden, surrounded by survivors and advocates and friends. My family learned about it from the newspapers. I made sure they did. I wanted them to know I was happy. Lydia tried to reach out from prison. Letters at first, full of apologies and excuses, then angry letters, blaming me for destroying the family, then threatening letters, promising she'd get revenge when she got out. I never responded, I just forwarded each letter to her parole board. They'd be useful when she came up for parole in 20 years. Not that she'd get it. My mother died in prison, 8 years into her sentence. Stroke, I didn't go to the funeral. Neither did anyone else from the family. She was buried in an unmarked grave in the prison cemetery. The prison chaplain said a few words over her casket. That was it. That was the end of the woman who'd murdered her own mother and tried to destroy her own daughter. When I heard the news, I felt nothing. No sadness, no relief, no satisfaction, just nothing. She was already dead to me. Had been for years. My father is still in prison. He'll be there for another 3 years. He's written to me twice, asking for money, asking for help appealing his conviction. I returned both letters unopened. Uncle Richard got out last year. He lives in a small apartment in Pennsylvania, working as a clerk in a hardware store. His wife remarried. His children changed their last name. He's alone, and he'll stay that way. 15 years after opening the museum, on my 43rd birthday, I stood in grandmother's room again. It had become my ritual, visiting her on my birthday, telling her about my year. I'm happy, grandmother, I said to her portrait. I'm so happy it almost scares me sometimes. Sarah and I are talking about adopting. Can you imagine? Me, a mother. I'm terrified I'll mess it up. That I'll be like them. The portrait, of course, said nothing, but I could hear her voice in my head, the way she used to sound when she was healthy and strong. You could never be like them, darling. You have too much love in your heart. I hope you're right, I whispered. I left a rose on the table beneath her portrait. I did that every time I visited, and walked through the museum. It was closed to the public today, but my staff was preparing for tomorrow's opening. A group of law students was coming for a tour. After that, a documentary crew, then a support group for abuse survivors. The museum had become something bigger than I'd ever imagined. It wasn't just about my story anymore. It was about all of our stories. Every survivor who'd fought back, every victim who'd found their voice, every person who'd refused to let their abusers win. I walked to the newest exhibit, the one we'd opened last month, Exhibit H, Stories of Survival. It featured letters and testimonials from people who'd visited the museum and found the courage to leave their own abusive situations. Hundreds of stories, thousands of lives changed. This was my real revenge. Not the prison sentences or the bankruptcies or the ruined reputations. Those were just the tools I'd used. The real revenge was this. I'd turned their crimes into something beautiful. I'd transformed their legacy of abuse into a legacy of healing. They'd tried to erase me. Instead, I'd erased them. Their names were only remembered now in the context of their crimes. They'd lost everything, their freedom, their money, their dignity, their family, but I'd gained everything. Love, purpose, peace, happiness. I'd won. 20 years after opening the museum, I received an email from a young woman named Emily. She was 19, and she'd just escaped an abusive family. She'd visited the museum and read about my story. She wanted to thank me for giving her hope. Your exhibit saved my life, she wrote. I thought I was trapped forever. I thought I'd never be free. But if you could do it, maybe I could too. I took all your advice from the foundation resources. I documented everything. I built my case. I got out. I'm safe now. And I'm going to college next year. Thank you for showing me it was possible. I cried when I read her email. Then I wrote back, offering her a scholarship from the foundation. She accepted. Emily was the 10,000th person to contact the foundation with a similar story. 10,000 people who'd escaped because of what I'd built. 10,000 lives saved or changed or improved. 10,000 revenges, because every time someone escaped an abusive family, every time someone built a better life, every time someone refused to be a victim, that was revenge. Revenge against every abuser who thought they could get away with it. Revenge against every system that failed to protect the vulnerable. Revenge against the idea that victims have to stay victims. We could all be Catherine Reeves. We could all come back from death. We could all reclaim what was stolen from us. I'm 50 now. Sarah and I raised 2 beautiful children, twins, a boy and a girl, adopted when they were 5. They're in college now, studying psychology and social work. They want to work for the foundation someday. They want to help people the way I helped people. They know my story. They've seen the museum, though I waited until they were old enough to understand it. They know what their grandmother did, who she was, what she chose. They know about my first life and my second chance. They know everything. And they still love me. Maybe because of all of it, not despite it. Lydia got out of prison last year after serving 23 years of her 25-year sentence. Good behavior, apparently. She's 53 now and she looks 70. Prison was hard on her. She's living in a halfway house, working as a cashier at a grocery store. She changed her name. She tried to disappear, but I know where she is. I always know. I have a service that monitors her, just in case, just to make sure she never comes near me or mine. She tried to visit the museum once, 3 months after her release. She thought she could sneak in, maybe vandalize something, get some small revenge of her own. The guards recognized her immediately. They escorted her off the property and filed a trespassing report. Her parole officer was not pleased. One more violation and she goes back to prison. She hasn't tried again. My father died 2 years ago, 6 months after his release. Heart attack. He was living alone in a studio apartment, estranged from everyone who'd ever known him. His funeral was attended by exactly 3 people: a former colleague who felt obligated, a social worker from the prison, and a priest who'd never met him. I did not attend, neither did Lydia or Uncle Richard. The family line died with him, in a sense. There are no more Ashworths who carry our legacy. Just me. And I carry a different name now, Catherine Ashworth Chen, a hybrid of my birth name and the name of the woman I love. Uncle Richard reached out to me last year. A letter, handwritten, begging for forgiveness, begging for a chance to make amends. He's sick, he said, lung cancer. He wants to make peace before he dies. I thought about it for a long time. Sarah asked me what I wanted to do. You don't owe him anything, she said. But if you need closure, if you want to see him, I'll support you. In the end, I wrote back. One sentence. You don't deserve forgiveness, but I deserve peace. We're even now. Don't contact me again. He didn't. The museum is still open, still thriving. We get visitors from all over the world now. Schools bring students, therapists bring clients, survivors bring their families, and I still visit grandmother's room every year on my birthday. Still leave a rose, still tell her about my life. I did it, grandmother, I tell her every year. I took it all back. I turned their evil into good. I won. And every year I swear I can feel her pride, her love, her approval radiating from that portrait. You always were my favorite, she seems to say, my strongest girl. The Ashworth estate stands as a monument to justice now, to survival, to revenge that transforms into healing. Every person who walks through its doors learns that abusers can be defeated, that victims can become victors, that death itself isn't the end if you're clever and determined and angry enough to fight back. I took everything from them. Their money, their freedom, their legacy, their names. I took it all and I used it to build something beautiful. Something that helps people. Something that matters. And when I die, my second final death, I'll leave everything to the foundation. The museum, the estate, the money, all of it. It will continue long after I'm gone, helping people escape the kind of hell my family put me through. That's the ultimate revenge. Not just defeating your enemies, but outlasting them. Becoming something they could never destroy. Building a legacy they could never match. They sold our ancestral home. I bought it back and turned it into a museum detailing their crimes. And I lived happily ever after. That's how this story ends. Not with their redemption. They don't deserve redemption. Not with forgiveness. They don't deserve forgiveness. It ends with me, happy and loved and successful, standing in the house they sold, surrounded by the evidence of their crimes, knowing that I won. Completely, totally, absolutely, I won. And they lost everything. The end epilogue. The museum lives on 30 years after I opened the Ashworth Family Museum of Betrayal. I attended the opening of its first satellite location in Chicago. I was 60 now, gray-haired and slower, but still sharp. Still fierce when I needed to be. The Chicago Museum was run by a woman named Maria, who'd escaped her abusive family at 16 using resources from my foundation. She'd become a lawyer, specialized in family law, and now she was opening a museum of her own. Not about her family, she didn't need that kind of closure, but a general museum about family abuse, recovery, and justice. You inspired me, Maria told me at the opening gala. Your story gave me permission to be angry, to fight back, to win. Good, I said. Stay angry, use it. She smiled. I will. I looked around at the museum she'd built, the exhibits she'd designed, the resources she was providing. This was my legacy spreading. This was the revenge that never ended. Because abusers would always exist. But now, so would museums like this, resources like this, survivors like us. The Ashworths had sold their ancestral home. I'd bought it back and turned it into a weapon that would fight abusers long after I was gone, a weapon that would never, ever stop. That was the real revenge. Not just my victory, but the eternal promise that abusers would face consequences, that their crimes would be documented, that their victims would be believed, that justice would always, always find a way. I raised my glass in a toast to the crowd at the Chicago opening. To survivors, I said. To fighters. To anyone who refused to stay a victim. This is for you. The crowd roared its approval, and somewhere in whatever comes after death, I hope my grandmother heard them. I hope she knew. I hope she was proud, because I'd done exactly what she'd asked me to do. I'd taken it all back. I'd lived a beautiful life, and I'd made them pay for what they'd done. Every single day. La farce,